Okay, so in this video I will be introducing Turing machines. And what Turing machines are is a mathematically rigorous way to look at computers. So what it does is you have an infinite uh, length of tape with numbers written on them, 0 or 1. I'm just going to do a trail of zeros, okay? And you're going to have a writing utensil, so probably put it right there. And it's going to have states on them. And what I'm going to write out is a state diagram, and it'll make sense once I explain how this works. And what it does is whatever you read, so if I read a 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that symbol with a 1, move it to the right, and move it to a different state. I'll call it Q1. Okay? And then at this state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it. So I'm going to have a 0, right? So what I'm going to do is if I read a 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a 1 and move it to the left. Okay? And then there's going to be another state I'll call Q2. And what I'm going to do if I read a 0 on Q2 is that I'm going to move it to state Q1 when I read a 0. I'm going to write 1 and I'm going to move it to the left. Okay? Now, if I read 1s, it's going to be a different story. Right here, if I read a 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the symbol 1, move it left, and move it to Q2. But if I'm at Q1 and I read a 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a 1. If I read a 1, I'm going to write a 1, move it right, and move it to itself. And if I'm here, what's going to happen, if I read a 1, I'm going to write a 1, then I'm going to move it to the right, and then I'm going to halt it. Okay? So this might seem a little complicated right now, but it'll make sense. So right now, my little pointer's on state Q0 and it's reading a 0. So you can see right here, if I read a 0, I'm going to write a 1. Okay. Then I'm going to move it to the right. So I'm going to move it to the right. Q0. Okay. I'm now on state Q1, indicated by the arrow. Now I'm at Q1 and I'm reading a 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it. Oh, I moved it in the wrong direction there. So I'm going to actually start it there. Now I'm here. I have Q1, and I'm reading a 0. So I'm going to write a 1 and move it to the left. Okay? I'm going to move it to the top. You'll see why. So now, right here, I'm going to have Q0. Okay, but now I'm reading a 1. So I'm going to move it to the left and set the state here to Q2. And I'd write a 1, but that'd just stay the same. Now, if I'm on Q2 and I read a 0, I'm going to write a 1 and move it to the left. Q2. And I'm going to move it to state Q1. Right? So right now, right here, if I read a 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a 1 and move it to the left. So this is going to be Q0. Now Q0, if I read a 0, I'm going to write a 1 and move it to the right. Q2. Q1, sorry. Move the state to Q1. Now I'm reading a 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a 1 and then move it to the right. And then right there's going to be 0. So I'm going to read a 1, move it to the right, move it to the right, move it to the right. All the way down here, I'm reading a 0, so it's going to be Q1 right down there. I'm reading a 0, so I write a 1, and I move it to the left. So now I'm at Q0. Then at Q0, I'm reading a 1, so I write a 1, and I move it to the left. So now I have Q2. Q2, read a 1, write a 1, move it to the right, and then stop it. Okay, if I did that correctly, what it basically did was just write a bunch of 1s on this infinite string of 0s. And you can do that for any initial tape starting. So now I'm going to give you the precise definition of a Turing machine in the way I like to do it. So a Turing machine is going to be a set of 7 things. Q, Q0, F, gamma, B, sigma, and delta. Okay? So, what these things are is that Q is your set of states. So, in our example, it was Q0, Q1, Q2, and then halt. Q0 is an element of Q, is the initial state. So in our example, it was Q0. So F is going to be a subset of Q, are the halting states, basically meaning where you stop. Gamma is the tape alphabet, the things that you can have on the tape. Sigma, a subset of gamma, is the input alphabet, basically meaning the things you're allowed to have on the tape. On the tape at the start. And then delta is going to be a map that takes in a state that is not a halting state. And it's also going to take in a letter, and it's going to output a state, a letter, and whether to go left or right. So, in our example, we had it that Q, our set of states, was Q0, Q1, Q2, and a halt. Q0 was Q0, F was the set of halt. Gamma was the set of 1 and 0, though we only really used 1. Sigma is going to be the set of 1 and 0 again. A delta was delta was the state map, the thing I wrote out. So that's the idea behind Turing machines. They're just computers where you write on tape. Oh man.